Savior Jesus Christ. Well, many of you know that Jennifer and I just got back from vacation out in Colorado a few weeks ago. We helped move our son out there, and we spent some time up in the mountains. And one of the privileges of being a pastor is being able to show your vacation pictures to your congregation. We had a beautiful time. This was just down the mountain range from Breckenridge, where all the ski resorts were, and there were actually still snow up on the ski slopes, but they were closed for the season. But we just had a wonderful time up in the mountains. We went up in Estes, and I think I told you that Jennifer was able with minus one lung because, she had a surgery and was able to survive at 9,000 feet. But what I didn't share was we had some anxious moments. It was getting really close to sunset, and we still had quite a ways to go to get out of the mountains, and I was starting to get a little bit uneasy. We had like a 2-mile stretch, and there were no landmarks, so I had no idea of knowing how close we were to the end, and it was getting a little bit dark, and of course, in the evening is when bear activity is the greatest, so I'm anticipating seeing bears and making it back on time. I'm getting a little uneasy, but I still had to drag Jennifer along because every time she saw an elk or some other wildlife, she would just want to sit there all day and want to look at it. So we almost had to leave her behind. But we had a picture of her. I couldn't find it in time. There were too many, but we had a great time. We went down to Colorado Springs, and we saw, we called it God's Garden, but it's known to 99% of the world as Garden of the Gods. We just didn't like that name, but it was a beautiful, beautiful area. We spent the time on the Lookout Mountain, and Jennifer almost had a heart attack on the way up because she doesn't like looking over the cliffs at the edge of the road, but she survived. And then we went to the Badlands on our way home. But, as much fun as we had and as beautiful as it was, we really enjoyed getting home. It was good to get home. Doesn't it seem to work that way with vacations? You enjoy your time away, but it is good to get home. In fact, we actually came home 2 days early. We had a rental car. It wasn't due until Monday night, but we came back on Saturday because, we like being home. We get to sleep in our own bed. We just like the routine of being at home. And our Bible verse today is talking about going home. It talks about the end of this, our journey on this earth, and it fondly looks forward to life on the other side. And what I'd like to do this morning is just to walk through our second reading today, our Corinthians reading, verse by verse, and apply these verses to our lives. And so let us take a look, beginning with verse 1. It says, "For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." And what this verse is speaking about, it's using a metaphor and a figurative language, and so it's referring to a tent. And that tent is referring to our earthly body. And what he's saying is if this tent is destroyed, that is, as if our body dies or if we die, then we will have a new home in heaven. And that will be a great home because our heavenly bodies will be eternal. And so that's what we have to look forward to on our journey as we are looking forward to going home. But what about the meantime? Well, Paul is saying in the meantime we get to do a little bit of groaning. On verse 2 it says, "For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as the guarantee." So this body that we call our own, this tent, as Paul refers to it, is wearing down. Is that news to anybody here today? No. Our bodies are wearing down, and my body, I'll say, groans at times. I think we all have that problem now and then. And this is one of the many consequences of sin in the world. We are every day getting older and experiencing more and more pain, and we long for that day of perfection in the truest sense, when that perfection will be ours, where there will be no more pain, no heartache, no depression, which is so prevalent in our world today, and no diseases. But did you know that even the creation is groaning? And why is that? Well, it's because the effects of sin have also not only impacted us, but really have impacted all of creation. And the creation is groaning for and longing for what it was, as it also anticipates the coming of Jesus, where it will be restored to its former perfect state. And this is what we call the new heaven and the new earth. And I believe that it's going to be much like the original Garden of Eden. So, as we live in this world, as we walk in this, our journey, we are still doing a little bit of groaning. And so Paul is pondering his future, and he's really struggling with this idea, do I want to stay on earth or do I want to die and go to heaven? You know, to him, life with Christ in heaven is the ultimate goal, the trophy, and it was really his earnest desire, and he wanted to be with God right away. Yet God still had work for him to do, and so Paul continues, verse 6. He says, so we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we walk by faith and not by sight. But yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from this body and at home with the Lord. So there, you can see the struggle that he is having here. And are we like that? Do we feel like a stranger in this world? Well, if you do, that's actually a good thing, because your true home is not in this world, but rather, if we are born of the Spirit, we long for our eternal home, just like Paul, which is with Christ. Now, we should clarify a little bit. We do know that Jesus is always with us. He will never leave us nor forsake us. But what we're talking about here is that we will be with Jesus in a sense much greater when we're in heaven than we will be with him today. And so Paul is saying it is better to be with the Lord than to be here. And in essence, in terms of putting this with our vacation, Paul is saying traveling is fun, but it is always good and even better to be home. That is where our heart is, and that is where our joy is complete, when we are with Jesus. So Paul is here, he's discussing where he would prefer to be. But then he realizes, regardless, in either case of where he is, either with the body or with the Lord, his goal is going to be the same. And he gives us that in verse 9. He says, so whether we are at home or away, our goal is to make it our aim to please him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. So this would be our take-home, or our application today. Paul's goal is for us to please God, regardless of where we are, regardless of the state of our body. Our goal and our purpose, both in this world and the next, is to please him. And yes, I don't know if you caught those very challenging words. We will stand before him in judgment. You know, as we Christians stand in judgment, We will, though, have Jesus as our advocate, and so we have nothing to fear. Because Jesus is our advocate, he will declare us not guilty, and he will put his cloak of righteousness upon us, and we will be allowed to enter into Jesus' presence. But as we've noted here before, we are justified by faith alone, but faith is never alone. And that is why it is important to please him. Because pleasing him shows a true relationship with him. So that is our challenge today, to please the Lord. So what does that look like? How do we go about pleasing the Lord? And our reading today really doesn't tell us, but the verses following our reading today does give us some help in what it means to please the Lord. So let's extend our reading a little bit. Let's look at verse 11. Verse 11 begins with the word therefore. So, therefore is always linking together what we had just said with what we're going to say. And what he had just talked about was that judgment. So we talked about the judgment. Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade others. So that is how we please God. We persuade others. Now, if we're going to